I'm going to be joined by author and commentator Shola Mos-Shogbamimu. She has written a book called This Is Why I Resist, Don't Define My Black Identity. The number to call if you want to put a question to our panel, 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, health officials have warned of a significant reduction in coronavirus vaccine supplies from the end of March. A letter to regional NHS leaders says the number of people getting their first dose will be constrained for a 4-week period. More than 25 million people have now had at least one injection. Here's Shadow Health Minister and Labour MP Justin Madders.
The issue here is that this looks like it wasn't planned. Ministers were very confident, I think, about supply up until this morning, and then all of a sudden this letter comes out, and certainly it wasn't, I think, what Matt Hancock wanted that press conference to talk about.
People aged 50 and over in England are now being invited to book their appointments. EU countries could be stopped from sending coronavirus vaccines to the UK. The President of the European Commission says some places are struggling with supplies. The Football Association has offered a heartfelt apology to the survivors of historical sex abuse for not doing enough to protect them. A report looking into allegations at English clubs between 1970 and 2005 has found institutional failings. A 50-year-old man has been arrested in Cheshire on suspicion of murdering Stuart Lubbock. The 31-year-old died after attending a party held at Michael Barrymore's home in Roydon in Essex in 2001. Officers say the arrest follows significant new information coming to light. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 40 at 67.62. The pound buys $1.38 and €1.16. LBC weather mostly clear across southern and eastern Scotland, northeast England and the West Country. Quite cloudy elsewhere with a low of 2 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm David Dom.
This is LBC. From Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question. With Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8:01 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. This is Cross Question, LBC's political panel debate show. You can listen to us, or you probably are listening to us. You can watch us also on the Global Player, on YouTube, Facebook or Twitter. And of course, this episode of Cross Question will be available as a podcast around midnight tonight. Well, let me introduce my panel to you. Richard Tice is former Brexit Party chairman. He's now leader of Reform UK, the successor to the Brexit Party. John Nicolson is SNP MP for Ochil and South Perthshire and frontbench spokesman on culture. And Nimco Ali is chief executive of the Five Foundation, and author and commentator Shola Mos-Shogbamimu is the author of This Is Why I Resist, Don't Define My Black Identity. They're all here to take your calls, 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. You look all very pretty on this screen that we have here. Much rather you were with me in the studio, but hey, you can't have everything. Let's go to our first question. It's from Chris in Richmond. Chris, hi. What would you like to ask?
Good evening, panel. Today, Boris Johnson has called for culture and social change in attitudes to women. Given his past comments about women, is he really the best person to deliver that change?
Are you thinking of any in particular?
Well, the Surrender Act, when Labour MPs were complaining about their safety and he called it humbug. Referring back to Joe Cox, his comments about women wearing the burqa looking like bank robbers, his comments about Totty in the newspapers. There's probably others you could quote as well, but there's 3 examples for you.
Shola, let's start with you.
The answer to the question is no. Boris Johnson is not the best person to put forward and convictions of rape at an all-time low. Prosecutions and convictions of sexual abuse and domestic abuse are at an all-time low. This government continues to continually fail to put women at the integral response on the economy, on public health, on many examples. So no, I don't think Boris Johnson is the right person to put that forward, because people will not believe him. I think definitely we have to work towards changing the society we live in, and deeply entrenched in misogyny and deeply entrenched in ways that treats women as the weakest sex and treats women as just not being the better part or as good enough as the male sex. We need to start to have the right conversations, but more importantly than conversation, we need to have the action. I know that's where the government is meant to come in, but we don't have a government that's got the political will to drive that through. And this isn't the first time that, if you think about it, the Conservative Party for the last 10 years has defunded the NHS, defunded women's rights organizations, defunded the very platforms that are meant to support women. So what we must do is not just exercise our civic right, which of course has been undermined with this with this policing bill. What we must do is demand better from our government.
Okay.
I'm just not convinced this government is the right one.
Nimco Ali, you've had some experience of campaigning on these issues, trying to persuade Boris Johnson to take action on some of them. What's your answer to Chris's question?
I do think, Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister that is commissioning a violence against women and girls strategy, a review into the rape convictions and the kind of low rape convictions and the broken justice system that we have at the moment. Boris Johnson is also the Prime Minister that has an NHS that's commissioning the first women's health strategy. So I do believe that this government is committed to working with women and working towards protecting women. So the violence against women and girls strategy was reopened last week, and we've already had 130,000 women kind of consult into that. So I'll just say that the difference is that I'm a campaigner, not a complainer. So I've seen things actually happening, and I'm happy to work with a government that's willing to do things.
John Nicolson, I can imagine what your answer might be to the question, but surprise me.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to surprise you. It's certainly, I don't think any of us think for one moment that Boris Johnson is a feminist, do we? But to be fair to him, he's got a whole history of revolting comments about every conceivable group. I mean, gay men, if you remember, Iain, were bum boys in tank tops. Muslim women.
But John, if you actually read that full article, which I have done, I don't know whether you have, you couldn't possibly take offence at what he was writing in that article. But if you just take those few words out, yes, you can take offence.
It's part of an ongoing history of being deeply offensive about lots of different groups. And yes, I have read the article. I ran against a Tory candidate, as you know, and I used the line repeatedly against him. He called children of single mothers ill-raised, ignorant and illegitimate. I mean, the list goes on. But as we say in our home country, Iain, God loves a sinner who repenteth. So it is possible that this new Boris Johnson is sincere in what he says. And I think all of us agree that in tackling the epidemic of violence against women, we've got to start when kids are young. Of course, it helps if you know your kids. But it's important to start with kids when they're young and change boys' attitudes towards women. I think everybody agrees that's where this crisis that we have probably begins, that if you're at school and you're friends with the girls, that means you're a poof or you're effeminate. It's masculine to only hang out with other boys, and it's the gay boys who hang out with the girls. I mean, this is an absurd macho attitude, and we've got to tackle, I think, some of the toxic masculinity that begins very early.
I hope you won't mind me saying, John, that people shouldn't take offence at that word you used. You're entitled to use it. You're a gay man yourself, but there will be people who wouldn't know that. So I just felt I should explain that.
That's a very good point. Well made. Yes, I'm openly gay. I was the first ever BBC One presenter when I presented Breakfast News to come out as gay, and indeed I was openly gay presenter of LBC's Breakfast. So I sometimes forget that people don't know that because of my rugged masculinity. They perhaps they perhaps don't click, but I'm happy to confirm that.
Talking of rugged masculinity, let's go to Richard Tice. When you look at Boris Johnson, do you see somebody who you think is convincing when he talks about women's issues?
Boris Johnson can convince. He's a great salesman, and let's hope that he means his words actually mean something. He's got a long track record, frankly, of his words meaning not a lot. Look, I think like all of us, I've learned a lot actually just in recent days, really, Ian. The survey that said that 97% of women have had some form of harassment or catcalling or wolf whistling. That was, I mean, I will admit to a sense of embarrassing naivety. I just didn't appreciate that level of it. I think you said something similar, Ian, just recently. So that's a real eye-opener that we all need to learn from. But equally, I think we need to be very careful about labelling all men as dangerous, as sort of the other side of that coin. I think that encourages sort of gender divisiveness. I don't accept that, we are a misogynistic society, and I don't accept that all schools, that all boys in schools are in some way behave badly towards girls. I mean, I spoke to my 23-year-old son yesterday, and he said, Dad, we've all got mental health issues here. We're coming out of the back of the lockdown. Everybody hates lockdown. We all agree on that. And now, Dad, I'm 23. I'm looking forward to being able to go to nightclubs, but now I'm told we're all dangerous. We can't go to nightclubs, and if there's going to be underclothes police officers in nightclubs. Wait a second. I don't think anybody thinks.
Well, hang on. John, very quickly, and then to Nimco.
I don't think anybody thinks or says that all men are dangerous. But what we all know from our women friends is that they have to put on trainers when they leave clubs in case they need to run, and that they have to tuck in their ponytails in case somebody grabs them. We hear time and time again from women that they don't feel safe. They don't suspect every man, but they know that the people who attack them are men. So they've got reason to be frightened,
Nimco.
And we should listen.
On the point of
Nimco, no, wait, Richard, I'll come back to you in a second. Let me go to Nimco first.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with the whole point. We're not saying all men, but every woman has had an experience. And this whole problem of saying these are women's issues, these are not women's issues, these are societal issues. We have to really deal with this as both men and women and actually understand that we have a broken social contract. So your 23-year-old son being uncomfortable about being targeted and being feared, we fear him whether there are undercover police officers or not, because we don't know which man is the one that's going to rape us or the one that's going to abuse us. So if he's feeling uncomfortable to be judged, imagine what it feels like to live on a day-to-day basis thinking you might get raped, attacked or murdered. So the whole point is that our life is corroded, our lived experience and the quality of our life is impacted by the fear that we feel on a day-to-day basis. So I don't feel sorry for the fact that your son is being conscious. And also, I really don't believe that, I don't know how old you are, but you have just learned today or this week that women across the country are actually sexually assaulted, or the fact that 87% or 97% of women have been sexually harassed. If you've learned that today, then you have an incredibly large blind spot, and you are the problem, and that is the problem in this country right now. Is the fact that men like you should know these things. It's just, I think I would be embarrassed in order to say that, because the whole point is the fact that you can't reach the age you have without actually understanding that women are scared on a day-to-day basis. Then stand here today and say that you're concerned about your 23-year-old son.
Richard, you're part of the problem.
Well, look, I said we never stop learning in life, and I learned something from that survey. And I don't know what percentage I previously did thought, but I just come back to the point. I think it shows a sense of humility that we keep learning. I've learned from that. I think that in a sense, yes, sure, that's a good thing. I'm just explaining that I don't think it's right to tarnish all men as being dangerous. I'm just giving the
Can I just add?
Nobody said all men. Nobody has ever said all men.
Okay, Nimco, let's hear from Shola.
Richard, the problem is when you don't recognize the culture we have in our society, a patriarchal culture that feeds the ability of some men to deny women their lives and liberty because of the patriarchy. That feeds into the misogyny, a culture that would blame women rather than protect women, that would first of all seek for women to prove their experience happened than to protect them. An experience that feeds into our broken criminal justice system. It feeds into how women are treated in the workplace, at schools. This is what we are talking about. So when you sit there and say, well, I don't believe we're a misogynist society, again, that's a huge blind spot, because the evidence is there. It speaks very loudly. And maybe, yes, because you're of the privileged class as male, we, as a default in our society, we cater to male, right? So you are of that privileged male class. Maybe, yeah, you can say, oh, I don't see it. But at your age, I don't know how old you are, but I know you're older than your son. I would say you ought to know better, Richard. You ought to know better by now. You ought to know, right? So I'm not buying that excuse.
I'm 56. We're all equal. Men and women, we are equal.
But society doesn't treat us equally. That's the problem. And society would rather silence a woman than deal with the problems that men, not all men,
all right,
men.
Let's give Richard the last word on this.
The vast majority of men are normal, decent, law-abiding citizens. And don't shake your head. You
said vast. And you just said 97% earlier. So how can you say vast when you said 97% of women experience all of this harassment?
Okay.
And women
Shola, we've got Shola. Let Richard have the final word, please.
Whether it's our sons, brothers, fathers, it's not right to tarnish all of us under that brush. And I think it's the danger is it becomes very divisive. And I think that's a shame. I think it's much more positive to say, actually, we're all equal and we all need to keep learning. And there's an interesting point about educating in schools and things, but I think let's try and do it in a more positive, optimistic light than trying to sort of say we're all misogynistic and bad. I just think
all right. No. Let's just hear from. We've got to go to a break in a second. Let's hear from Chris from Richmond, who asked the original question. 30 seconds, Chris.
I agree with you, but I think John Nicolson. I mean, look at the way Joanna Cherry's been treated in your party. Lots of misogynistic trolls against her. The Lib Dems and Labour, all political parties, to be fair, have had their issues. So equally, I don't think other political parties can be too sanctimonious about the issue. Is my point.
Do you accept that, just finally, John Nicolson, that, all political parties have a problem with this and that Joanna Cherry has been treated appallingly by male SNP members?
How has she been treated appallingly?
Are you not aware of all the abuse that she's suffered because of various positions that she's taken? She's seen as a supporter of Alex Salmond, which obviously is not allowed now in the SNP, and she's had disgusting things, rape threats, death threats, and I can't believe you're not aware of it.
I wondered if there was something specific that the caller was raising. I condemn all abuse, obviously, in social media. Women get particularly dreadful abuse. The First Minister of Scotland, Nicolas Sturgeon, some of the things written about her and to her are really revolting. And Dan Abbott gets more abuse than just about every other politician in Parliament put together. The misogynistic abuse of women in politics is revolting, and it puts off so many good people who might otherwise want to stand. So yes, I condemn abuse directed at Joanna Cherry and all other women who get it.
Well, I did say that we would have a spicy panel tonight. We're a quarter of a way through the programme. I think I was probably right. Lots of time for you to get your questions in. 0345 6060 973. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
22 minutes past 8. We've got quite a spicy panel next week as well, with LBC presenter Natasha Devon, former Education Secretary Nicky Morgan, Labour MP Andrew Gwynn, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. But let me reintroduce my panel tonight. Richard Tice from Reform UK, John Nicolson from the SNP, Nimco Ali, Chief Executive of the Five Foundation, and author and commentator Shola Mos-Shogbamimu. Right, let's go to our next caller. It's Steve in Marlborough. What have you got to ask, Steve? Hi.
Evening, Ian.
Hi.
I want the panel's view on the way that the women protesters were treated last week and over the weekend. There was a clear delta in police behaviour between the Black Lives Matters protesters back in the summer and the way the ladies that stood for a vigil quite rightly and very responsibly over the last few days. In particular, the social distancing that they showed and the cooperation with the police to organise these events, in contrast to Black Lives Matters, who just did what they wanted. I think it's appalling the way the police behaved.
OK, Richard Tice.
Hi, Stephen. Yeah, look, I was quite vocal. I was shocked and appalled on Saturday night. I just think the police just got it horrendously wrong. Policing is never easy. We all accept that for frontline officers. But I just think there was a lack of common sense by the Met officers. And you contrast that with what happened, very dignified vigils in other cities around the UK, where actually it was dignified, it was socially distanced, and it passed off, appropriately. And sadly, the Met have got a track record of getting it wrong on numerous occasions. And I think that is down to actually a failure of leadership, senior leadership at the Met. And how long do we go on before we say, actually, some of these senior leaders in the Met have got to be held accountable? And that's why I called for Cressida Dick to resign. I think we need to rebuild confidence in the Met. And frankly, that starts at the top. There needs to be some accountability. And if she won't resign, then I really do think the Mayor of London, who ultimately is the Police and Crime Commissioner for London, should ask her to resign.
And of course, he said that he didn't accept her explanation. He was unconvinced by it, which I thought personally made her position untenable. But she's come out fighting, and she's got the support of the Prime Minister.
Which I just find it extraordinary. I just think, people in senior positions of leadership like that, they've got to be held accountable. We all make mistakes. But when it's a consistent track record of getting policing wrong on these big issues, these big events, I'm not blaming the frontline officers. They could so easily, on Saturday night, have stood at the back and respected the dignified wishes of the people who were there, looking to hold the vigil and pay tribute. I was just shocked and deeply saddened.
Nimco Ali.
So the incidents on Saturday were disproportionate, and I was horrified. And also, what was really depressing was the reaction on Sunday morning when the police started to blame the women that came there in order to be a vigil, which I said was straight out of the playbook of victim blaming and saying that, well, if the women hadn't turned up, then we wouldn't not have been violent. I think this whole situation has been handled insensitively, because the reality is, when Sarah disappeared, thousands of us, if not millions of us across this country prayed that she just forgot her phone or something had happened. But at the bottom of our hearts and in our guts, we knew something had happened. So when we found out that she had been killed or she had died, there was grief pouring out, and women are coming forward in order to express the near misses, the experience that they've had, the fears that they have. And the police have to just understand that we are grieving collectively as women. And if that's not being understood by the Met, I think that is just quite depressing. And one of the things that I really find quite offensive about what Cressida did was her coming out and telling us that incidents like the things that happened to Sarah were rare. It's not about the rarity, it's about the fear that we have right now. So it was disproportionate, and it's disappointing the way that they're reacting to women who are grieving at the moment.
Shola, are we going to get you agreeing with Richard Tice? This is what I'm anticipating here.
Believe it or not, can you believe that? Well, agree with Richard and Nimco. I think without a doubt in my mind, the outrage I felt on Saturday that the police basically, that was just a violent assault on the vulnerability of women as we collectively grieved Sarah Everard and other women that have been lost to male violence. As far as I see it, it was a desecration of our rights in that collective stance to fight this structure that enables some men with violence to violently deny women their liberty and their lives. I just don't understand what possessed them. And I think the callers point.
Let me play.
The caller deliberately conflates what the police did on Saturday at the vigil with the Black Lives Matter protest. There's just no comparison because there was definitely a violent response by the police towards Black Lives Matter protesters, and it was also a response to the dog whistle politics of Boris Johnson and Priti Patel that drew all those white supremacists and neo-Nazis to a protest that was fight racial inequality.
Let me play devil's advocate a second, because I'm not disagreeing with you, but let me put forward a point of view which has been expressed by many people, that it was very peaceful during the afternoon, but when it got dark, the vigil did become a protest, and it was taken over by some of the usual suspects who inhabit these protests. You saw some of the placards, the sort of anarchists, sort of fairly extreme messages on some of the placards. So were the police not right to intervene at that stage when it turned into something that it hadn't been before?
So, Iain, this is me recognizing you're playing the devil's advocate. So I'm just going to chill out a bit on my response to you right now.
Okay,
because
go on.
What the heck? In what world does holding a placard make it a violent protest? In what world does being passionate about your grieving make it a violent protest? Protest comes in different forms. They were not being violent. It was a vigil. Because even at a vigil, you can cry, you can be angry, you can be frustrated. In what world is it okay for the police to then manipulate your frustration, to then manipulate your feelings, a collective stance, and say, I'm sorry, you know what, because of the sweeping powers that the government has given us, we're going to stand up and stop you from exercising your frustration. This is nonsense. And, to Richard's point about Cressida Dick, the reason she can get away with excusing the police's behavior is because Boris Johnson backs her. And yet you ask me why I would trust Boris Johnson or whether he should be a face for pushing the agenda of gender equality. Heck no. Clearly he doesn't have women.
Okay. John, I suspect you're going to probably agree with the other three panelists. I'd be grateful if you can be quite short, and I'll give you a lot longer answer in the next one.
Well, what I would say is that what I found depressing about it was that it distracted from Sarah, whom people were wanting to think about that night, Sarah and her family. And instead, the headlines were dominated by questions about policing. I think one of the things a lot of people will find strange is the inconsistency. The police were kettling people and pushing them towards the bandstand in Clapham. We're trying to keep, apparently, it looked as if they were trying to keep them there rather than allow people who wanted to leave to leave. And the inconsistency is that if you go to Borough Market, for example, on the same day, it's absolutely ram-packed. So where's the consistency in the policing? I think that the police probably feel under a degree of pressure from an authoritarian Home Secretary. And of course, this week, we have the policing bill before Westminster, which will have a chilling effect on rights to protest, where the Home Secretary will have enhanced powers and where the police can decide to stop protest because they're too noisy. Have you ever heard of a quiet protest? The idea that in our very old democracy, you can stop people protesting because they're making too much of a racket is shocking. And that's what's before the Commons from the Conservative Party and the Conservative government this week.
But John, that would mean that I am a one-woman band protest, right? It means they will look to shut me down because I am loud. This is part of the problem, right?
You and me both.
You are quite loud, Shola. I think we can all agree on that one. That's not a bad thing.
I am vocal. There's a difference. Very vocal.
Wow. Just wait for the next question. That's all I can say. We will have more of your questions in just a moment. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 8:31. Time for the news headlines with David Dom.
The Health Secretary insists all adults in the UK will still get a coronavirus vaccine by the end of July, despite supply pressures. Vaccination centres have been told to expect fewer doses for around 4 weeks from the 29th of this month. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary has warned the EU not to block the export of jabs. Earlier, the European Commission President suggested that could happen if the vaccines are headed to nations with higher inoculation rates. A long-awaited report has found the Football Association did not do enough to keep children safe from abusers. The governing body has issued an apology to hundreds of survivors of historical sexual abuse. LBC weather mostly clear across southern and eastern Scotland, northeast England and the West Country. Quite cloudy elsewhere with a low of 2.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:36. Andrew in Streatham tweets, so who are the dudes and the Dudines on the panel today. Well, let me reintroduce them to you. Richard Tice is leader of Reform UK. John Nicolson is SNP MP for Uchel and South Perthshire and spokesman on culture. Nimco Ali is chief executive of the Five Foundation, and Shola Mos-Shogbamimu is an author and commentator, and her book is called This Is Why I Resist. Don't Define My Black Identity. So that's 2 plugs for the book. I don't know if that's going to satisfy Shola. I think she probably wants a few more. We'll see what we can do. Let's go to our next question. It's from Anthony in Staines. Hi, Anthony.
Hi, Iain. Hi, panel. Is Nicolas Sturgeon heading for the high road or the high jump after May?
It could mean the same thing. John Nicolson, I have to come to you first on that one, seeing as I said I'd give you a bit more time on this answer.
Well, Nicola Sturgeon is not only the most popular party leader in Scotland, she's the most popular party leader in England. She's a phenomenal politician. She's peerless. And the SNP is streets ahead in the polls. And for the first time, we're seeing consistent polling that shows the majority of people in Scotland want independence for Scotland.
That was true until the last few weeks, of course.
No, there have been there's been one very dodgy poll out today, which asked a totally absurd question, which Sir John Curtis, the great pollster, immediately debunked. But the polls are overwhelmingly, I think I'm right in saying, 23 out of 24 polls now show strong support for Scottish independence. And what's interesting about it is the age groupings. The only group that is anti-independence is that a group of 55 pluses. But when you get down to the 35-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, the 25-year-olds, overwhelming support for independence. And of course, what tilted the balance was Brexit, because there was a lot of people in the middle in Scotland who wanted to be Scottish, British and European. But what the Brexiteers did was remove that from them. And they've had to make a choice. And for many people looking at the choices, they'd much rather be a small, successful, independent country like Denmark in the European Union than be part of Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain. So I think she'll win in May and will lead us to independence.
Are you not concerned, though, that the events of the last few weeks, and we all know what we're talking about, the fallout between Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon and what happened in those committee hearings, which I think they were both quite impressive in, if I'm honest, but that, I think, has maybe undermined some of the support that there was previously for independence?
I really don't think so. All the evidence is that that's Holyrood bubble stuff. Those of us who are involved in politics have been watching it closely. Certainly her performance was impressive. She sat before a Holyrood committee, a hostile committee of political opponents for 8 hours. Can you imagine Boris Johnson answering questions for 8 minutes, let alone 8 hours?
Well, to be fair, he does do 2 or 3 hours in the Commons quite regularly.
I've never seen him do 3 hours speaking, answering questions. He never answers questions.
No, he does. But on the COVID statements, he's often done 2 or 3 hours in answer. Anyway,
she very successfully debunked a lot of the conspiracy theories that we've heard, and she gave very detailed testimony. Obviously, on a personal basis, it's very sad what's happened between her and Alex Salmond, because she was his greatest admirer and they were close personal friends. And I'm so sorry Alex Salmond didn't choose to go off after he was First Minister and lost his seat, to go off and do something important in the international community, a Mary Robinson type role. Instead, sadly, he went on to Russia Today and then started spinning conspiracy theories. It's very sad.
There was an intervening period, of course, when he used to present a show with me on LBC every week. I'm sure you tuned into that, John. Final question on this for you. David Davis in the Commons last night, I don't know if you saw it, but the SNP chief whip tried to get the deputy speaker to silence David Davis. Now, he used parliamentary privilege to impart information or make allegations which he wouldn't have been allowed to in the Scottish Parliament. So you there have a Tory unionist politician effectively saying the Scottish Parliament needs more powers. How ironic is that?
It is. David Davis, of course, is a close friend of Alex Salmond's, was his first guest on his Edinburgh Festival show. So they have a long bond going back a long way. But I thought what David Davis showed was just how careful you should be with the use of parliamentary privilege, because Rape Crisis Scotland, the women's charity, have come out today to say that what David Davis said was entirely misleading and wrong, and they've issued a press statement from the woman concerned who's debunked yet another conspiracy theory, and sadly there are too many of them coming out of the Salmon camp.
Right, I'm going to ask the three of you to be fairly brief now on this. Going back to the original question, does the panel think that Nicola Sturgeon is for the high jump or the high road in May? Shola?
I agree with John's comments. I think that Nicola Sturgeon has been quite impressive in her responses. I think she is not on her way out. Is that concise enough?
That's very concise, unexpectedly concise. Thank you very much. Richard?
I mean, there's no question. Nicola Sturgeon is a very impressive and popular politician in Scotland. John is right on that. I do think that David Davis's revelations in the House of Commons do demand additional answers from Nicola Sturgeon and people in the SNP government. They do seem to add additional information that didn't appear to be there before. It's incredibly complex, far too complex for most people. But there are real question marks about the proper separation of powers between the government, the judiciary, and Parliament itself. And I think that is really troubling. And whatever happens with this, I do think there needs to be some lessons learned about that and to really reinforce those divisions. They exist pretty successfully in Westminster. I think there's real question marks whether they exist properly in Holyrood.
What's the one thing that, as a new party leader, Nicola Sturgeon can teach you?
That's a great question. Her ability to continually communicate in a way that actually I think people empathise with her. She's a great communicator, and lots of people can learn from that.
Nimco?
Well, it's quite evident that she is a very popular leader, and I don't think she's on her way out, and I think she'll do quite well in May. But I really do wish that she'd work for a better role for Scotland within the Union rather than calling for a referendum again, because there's already been one. So that's my take on it.
Of course, people have got the right to change their minds, don't they? That's part of living in a democracy, that all of us accept the results, and then we pick ourselves up, dust ourselves down, and we go off and we argue for what we believe in, and we hope that we'll manage to persuade people of our point of view. That's healthy in a democracy, and it's also proving to be successful in Scotland. Can I just say that I think Iain mentioned that long grilling that she got, and I just want to look back at a previous discussion that we had. I thought the low point in all of that was one of the Tory politicians, Murdo Fraser, asking Nicola Sturgeon to apologise for the bad behaviour of a man. And when the man was there in front of him, he didn't ask the man concerned to apologise for his own bad behaviour. And I thought that was old-fashioned sexist politics. And that's exactly the sort of thing that we should no longer be indulging in our party politics or society in general.
I could at this point mention the phrase once in a generation, but that would be gratuitous. Shola, final word from you.
How long's a generation, Iain?
10 years at least.
25.
25? 25 years.
So Shola, go on. Shola wanted to
right,
come
so
in. Final word.
If you just missed the vote, and if you were 15 at the time of the referendum, Richard is seriously saying that you should not be allowed to vote again until you're 40. Far too much is placed on this once in a generation thing. Boris Johnson said that the last election was once in a generation. Does that mean we're having no further elections?
On membership of the European Union, I think we had to wait 50 years. Shola, final word.
I was agreeing with John. This is me agreeing. And this is me being concisely agreeing without saying anything. I thought you would appreciate that. Yeah.
You can definitely come back. Thank you very much. Right, another question in a moment. It's 8:46.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. LBC.
Business Secretary Kwesi Kwarteng, government initiative now to drive down emissions from industries and public buildings, creating and supporting 80,000 jobs, which is obviously good news. Can I speak about some people who already are in jobs? Those would be our nurses and others NHS staff who are offered a 1% pay rise, but you've just found £1 billion to spend here.
The pay of the nurses is under a pay review, and I'm sure we'll come to a reasonable decision.
Can I take from your expression reasonable decision that there's likely to be some form of pay lift then?
The pay proposal is under review, and there will...
Well, things are only under review if they're not acceptable. Just give them some extra money.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7. LBC. Britain's conversation. Cross question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:50, Richard Tice, John Nicolson, Nimco Ali and Shola Mos-Shogbamimu are with me answering your questions. Text from Karen in Hartlepool. Who do the panel think are the most likely winners of the upcoming Hartlepool by-election? Richard Tice, I think we should come to you on that one. I'm sure you're expecting this question. Are you going to stand because you were the candidate there in the election, general election?
Well, you asked me to be brief. Obviously, I think that Reform UK should win the by-election in Hartlepool, and let's wait and see. And to answer your question, Ian, yes, I am actively considering whether I should stand or whether some of our other Reform UK supporters and people should stand. So that's under consideration at the moment. Let's wait and see. I'm not going to reveal it exclusively, whatever you might like to do on this show.
Well, that's a big letdown, because I mean, you have got the name recognition. You got 10,000 votes there last time. You prevented the Conservatives from winning it. Well, why are you being so coy? It's unlike you.
Well, just reflecting and considering. There's all sorts of things. It's there's a lot of elections going on that day all over the country, as you know, and
there are.
So we're actively considering the right decision.
Right, brief answers from the other three of you. John Nicholson, do you take an interest in by-elections in England?
Well, of course I do. I'm a political journalist by training, as you know. I can see Richard there in Hartlepool, really. I mean, I've heard that the guacamole dip in the chippies is absolutely delicious. So the answer to the question is, obviously, I hope that Labour wins the seat because God knows we've got far too many Tories in House of Commons at the moment with a huge majority, not healthy for democracy, and the Hartlepool needs a decent left of centre, preferably anti-Brexit member of Parliament, and I hope they get one.
Nimco.
The best local candidates should win. I'm non-partisan in that sense, but hopefully they'll have more information about male violence against women than Richard does. So somebody that's informed about society today, hopefully.
Shola?
Let the best local candidate win.
Well, again, admirably concise. I'm really warming to you, Shola, I have to say. Right, let's go on to another question. Jake is in Derby. Jake, what would you like to ask the panel?
Do the panel think that black women are less likely to receive, like justice compared to their white and Asian counterparts in the legal system in regards to sexual violence?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it? John, let's start with you.
I'm sorry, I had trouble hearing that. Do you mind repeating it for me?
Does the panel think that black women are treated differently in the penal system compared to their white or Asian counterparts in terms of reporting sexual assault?
Well, we know that black people are disproportionately likely to be jailed, don't we? That happens both in the United Kingdom and the United States. There clearly is a problem with the way the juries see people of colour who appear before them, and I know that most people who are involved in the judicial system feel that we need more high-profile, highly visible black women involved in the legal system. We all know the story about the black barrister who turned up in court, and she was treated by court officials as the accused, and she had to tell them, "No, I'm a barrister," and they found it really difficult to believe her. So there is deep racism, I think, in many aspects of our legal system, and it's a problem that black people confront every day in society.
And Shola, do you recognise that? You're a lawyer, I believe.
The answer to the question is yes. I mean, black and ethnic minority women don't get treated the same in the broken criminal justice system we have, particularly black and ethnic minority women that experience domestic violence, sexual abuse, rape. As many of us have also pointed out, When Black women go missing, and Asian women go missing, they don't get afforded the same media attention or police attention as you would find with white women, where the highlight is placed on them. And that feeds into the structural racism we have in our society. So what we experience in life is what you find Black and ethnic minority women experiencing at death as well.
Richard.
I fear, sadly, as Shola says, the answer is yes, and it has to change, and change incredibly rapidly.
Did Richard just agree with me?
I think that's the second time this evening, Shola.
Twice. That's why this programme is so groundbreaking.
We have to be equal, and we have to reform, areas of clear inequality, and this is just wholly unacceptable. And it's got to change, and it's got to change urgently.
Nimco.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And sometimes the forms of violence and forms of abuse that we face are not even criminalised, and they're other. And so, as somebody that was subjected to an act of violence, which was female genital mutilation, I spent over 25 years, if not more, trying to actually try to seek humanity and dignity, in the sense that, so one of the questions I keep getting asked is like, why should we criminalize FGM? Because it's a human rights violation. So actually Black and ethnic minority women's dignity and humanity is very much questioned and always othered. So there are also forms of violence which are on a day-to-day basis, like, they dismiss polygamy, forced marriage, and so-called honor killings when they're just murdered by men. So yeah, our access to justice is a lot harder than other women, and we know that women's access to justice is already difficult. So yeah, definitely agree with that, and it's quite depressing.
Well, I think some really interesting answers there. Of course, it's easy that we all agree something must be done, but what's the one thing maybe Shola? What's the one thing that you would like to change in the law?
I would like to see how we address root causes of racism and inequality, because that is what feeds into every single aspect. I would like to see, to Nimco's point about how we criminalize the experiences of violence and abuse that are subjected to Black women and ethnic minorities. So even when you talk about misogyny, I would like to see the government, I would like to see the legislation take that more seriously. But more importantly, is recognizing how all of these experiences intersect. I don't believe right now our equality laws allow us to be able to take action on inequalities that intersect. It doesn't recognize it as it should. So okay. I would like to see that.
Final question. It's on a text from Sheila in Belfast. It's St. Patrick's Day. Which Irish person would you most like to share a pint of Guinness with? So many to choose from. John Nicolson.
This is a fantasy question, so I think I would like to go back into my past and share a glass of Guinness with Seamus Heaney, who taught me poetry at Harvard. I wish I'd known him when I was a little bit older. I'd like to have had longer conversations with him with a bit more life perspective. He was a wonderful person, and obviously an incredible poet.
Such a name dropper there, John. Richard Tice.
To be honest, this is Cheltenham week, and I'm normally at Cheltenham enjoying a pint of Guinness with thousands and thousands of happy Irish people after they've won or lost. That's where I'd like to be sharing a pint of Guinness.
You're not going to name anyone?
Thousands of friends, no, so I'm not going to give a name.
All right.
Thousands.
Nimco?
My colleague and co-founder of the Five Foundation, Brendan Wynne, he's very much Irish and stuck in Dublin at the moment, and he would be here normally on International Women's Month, so he'd be the one I'd like to share a pint of Guinness. I don't actually drink Guinness or alcohol at all, but yeah. Me neither. We're very clean living people. Shola?
I don't drink, actually, but you know what?
There's three of us.
I know. For my Irish friends, I might just take a sip of Guinness to find out what all the fuss is about, and then introduce them to jollof rice. And then we'll spend St. Patrick's Day that way.
They love Guinness in Nigeria.
I know they do. Can you believe that? I don't drink.
Look, thank you all very much indeed for joining us on this week's Cross Question. John Nicolson, Nimco Ali, I knew I've got your name right all through this programme, Shola, and I knew I would muck it up in the end. Shola Mos-Shogbamimu. What a fantastic name. Richard Tice, you're much simpler in so many ways. Thank you very much indeed. Cross Question returns next week at 8. If you've missed any of this episode, you can, of course, catch it on the Cross Question podcast. We are going to turn our attention to the AstraZeneca vaccine in a minute and Ursula von der Leyen's comments. You might imagine I might have some views on that, and you'd be right. It's 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, health officials have warned of a significant reduction in coronavirus vaccine supplies from the end of March. A letter to regional NHS leaders says the number of people getting their first dose will be constrained for a 4-week period. More than 25 million people have now had at least one injection. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has insisted the rollout is still on track.
Vaccine supply is always lumpy, and we regularly send out technical letters to the NHS to explain the ups and downs of the supply over the future weeks, and what you're referring to is a standard one of those letters.
People aged 50 and over in England are now being invited to book their appointments. Downing Street has urged the EU to stand by its commitments on vaccine exports. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has threatened to use whatever tool required to ensure adequate supply within the bloc. She's accused AstraZeneca of having underproduced and underdelivered its jab. Shadow Health Minister Justin Madders has told LBC this needs a resolution.
It's distracting from what should be our common aim, which is to make sure that as many people